Hi, and welcome back to The Lowest Crime, the podcast all about true crime from one of the lowest countries in the world, the Netherlands. I'm Eline, and today's episode is a little different from what I usually cover here. Today we're telling the story of Anne Frank, a 15-year-old girl who died as a result of Nazi persecution in the Holocaust. After her death, she became known worldwide through the diaries that she left behind. So, this isn't a case with one clear victim and one clear perpetrator, but a tragic story about what happens when hate is allowed to grow into policy and entire groups of people are vilified. But although different, this is a true crime story, and an important one to tell, especially given how unstable and polarized the world feels right now. Please be aware that today's episode includes themes of persecution, deportation, and the death of a child during the Holocaust, so listener discretion is advised. And just a reminder, I do my very best to bring you all the known facts, but I am just an amateur podcast creator, so there is always a chance of me making a mistake. With that being said, this is the story of Anne Frank and the system that killed her. Anne Frank was born on June 12, 1929, in Frankfurt am Main, Germany. Her parents, Otto Frank and Edith Frank Hollander, were Jews that lived an ordinary life in Germany. Otto Frank had served as an officer in the German army during the First World War, while Edith devoted herself to the family and raising their daughters, Margot and Anne. The family spoke German, participated in civic life, and practiced Judaism in a liberal, non-orthodox way. Anne was the second child. She was outspoken, energetic and curious. And her 3-year older sister Margot was quiet, reserved and academically gifted. The Frank family lived in a comfortable apartment in a mixed neighborhood. Anne's early childhood was, by all available accounts, stable and unremarkable. She played outside, attended kindergarten, and lived a life that gave no indication of how it would end. By the early 1930s, Germany was undergoing severe economic and political instability. Unemployment was widespread and extremist parties gained influence. In 1932, the Nazi Party became the largest political party in Germany, and in January 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor. What followed was not an immediate wave of mass murder. It was something more subtle and, ultimately, far more dangerous. It was a step-by-step process in which discrimination was normalized, rights were removed, and hostility towards Jews and other groups deemed inferior steadily escalated. Jewish people lost government jobs, Jewish shops were no longer allowed to do normal business, and new laws slowly removed Jewish people from public life. For Jewish families like the Franks, the danger was not a single moment of terror, but a growing understanding that the country was changing, and that it was changing in a way that left no place for them. And so, in August 1933, Otto moved to Amsterdam. He did not leave because Germany was already unsafe in a physical sense. He left because he recognized the direction the country was taking. The Netherlands at that point was neutral, democratic, and comparatively stable. And so Amsterdam became home to thousands of Jewish refugees from both Germany and Austria. Otto had frequently been in the Netherlands before on account of his company, Opekta. His firm was the Dutch brand of a German company, and their product was used in jam making. By September 1933, Edith joined them in Amsterdam. Anne and Margot at that time stayed with their grandmother in Agen. Margot came to Amsterdam in December, and Anne followed in February. They both started school there, Margot in January and Anne in April, and both girls learned Dutch quickly and had no trouble making new friends. Otto would later say about Anne, as soon as she entered the living room, things got turbulent, especially since she often took a whole bunch of friends home. She was very popular because she always had ideas about games they could play or things they could get up to. The family settled in the Rivierenbuurt, a newly built neighborhood in Amsterdam that would soon be known for its large refugee population. For Anne, This move marked the beginning of a second childhood. She attended the Montessori school, and many of her classmates were refugees as well. Among them were Hannelie Goslar and Sanne Lederman, and they would remain close friends for years to come. The Frank family lived a relatively comfortable life. Anna went to school, played with friends, went to the beach in summer and ice skated in the winter. But Germany and the political situation remained ever present in the background. In November 1938, the Nazi regime carried out what would become known as the Kristallnacht. Jewish homes, synagogues, and businesses were destroyed, and tens of thousands of Jewish men were arrested. Members of Edith Frank's family were directly affected as well by the growing persecution of Jews in Germany. Edith's mother, Rosa, decided to make the move as well from Aachen to Amsterdam in 1939. Although the Franks up until that point had been relatively safe in the neutral Netherlands, that neutrality ended in May of 1940 when Nazi Germany invaded the country. And with the German occupation, anti-Jewish measurements were introduced gradually. New regulations were often presented as administrative, but together they worked to isolate Jews from the rest of Dutch society. Jewish-owned businesses were required to register with authorities. Civil servants were forced to declare that they and their families were not Jewish, and those who were identified as Jewish were dismissed from public positions. Registration soon extended to individuals. Jews were ordered to register themselves, and their identity documents and official records were marked with a J to distinguish them from the non-Jewish population. In the autumn of 1941, Anna was forced to leave her Montessori school and transfer to the Jewish Lyceum in Amsterdam. She entered the school on October 15, 1941, at the start of the 1941-1942 school year. At the Jewish Lyceum, Anna found herself in a class made up almost entirely of other Jewish children, many of them refugees like herself. She wrote extensively in her diary about the teachers and classmates during this period, describing friendships, conflicts, and everyday school life. Despite the growing restrictions outside the classroom, Anna remained lively and outspoken at school. She was frequently reprimanded for talking too much, and was once made to write a series of essays as punishment. The first time the topic given was a chatterbox, the second time an incorrigible chatterbox, and the third time quack, 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 said Mistress Chatterback. But the atmosphere at the Jewish Lyceum was changing. By 1942, all Jews were forced to wear a yellow star on their clothing, and over the course of the school year, the number of students steadily decreased. Classmates were called up and reported for transport to Germany, were arrested during raids, or disappeared into hiding. When, in late June 1942, Margot received a letter summoning her for forced labor in Nazi Germany, the family understood what this meant. And on July 6, 1942, Anna and her family went into hiding as well. The Frank family went into hiding in a concealed annex behind Otto Frank's business at Prinsengracht 263 in Amsterdam, hidden behind a revolving bookcase that functioned as a door. They were soon joined by Herman and Auguste van Pels and their son Peter, followed later by Fritz Pfeffer, a Jewish dentist. 8 people lived in a confined space, dependent entirely on trusted helpers for food, news, and survival. The group would remain hidden in the annex for just over 2 years. During that time, their world was reduced to a few small rooms. Curtains had to remain closed to prevent anyone outside from seeing movement inside. Daylight was limited, and fresh air was scarce. During working hours in the building below, they were required to stay completely silent. No running water, no footsteps, no voices raised above a whisper. Any sound could mean discovery. Food was always uncertain. Supplies depended entirely on what their helpers could obtain, and shortages were constant. Hunger became a regular part of daily life. Living in such close quarters, without privacy, and without the possibility of ever going outside, placed enormous strain on everyone. Tensions rose easily. Small disagreements could grow into serious conflicts simply because there was no escape from one another. It was under these conditions, confined, isolated and cut off from the outside world, that Anne continued what she had always loved to do, write. On June 12, 1942, before they had gone into hiding, Anne had received a diary for her 13th birthday. And now, being hidden away in the annex with nothing to do, Anne wrote constantly. She wrote about hunger, fear, frustration, boredom, and conflict. She also wrote about her dream of becoming a writer. She wrote about the arguments between the adults, about her difficult relationship with her mother, and about her admiration for her father, as well as her growing feelings for Peter, the boy who had also stayed with them in the annex. In March 1944, after already living hidden away in the annex for over 2 years, Anne heard a radio broadcast calling for wartime diaries to be preserved, and so she began revising her diary for publication. She rewrote her entries carefully, with a clear sense of purpose. By that point, she was 15 years old. But Anne would never be able to finish her work or publish it herself, because on August 4th, 1944, only around 9 months before the Netherlands would be liberated, the people inside were betrayed and discovered. It has never been definitively established who betrayed them, but what is known is that on that day, all 8 people who had been hiding in the annex were arrested, as well as some of the people who had been helping them. On Tuesday, the 8th of August 1944, Anne Frank and the other people from the Secret Annex were transferred from House of Detention 1 in Amsterdam to the Westerbork transit camp, a train trip in a regular passenger train that would have taken about 5 or 6 hours. Because they had been in hiding, rather than reporting voluntarily for deportation, they were classified as punishment cases, and this had concrete consequences for them. They had to wear a white armband with an S for strafgeval, criminal, and they were placed in the strafbarak, punishment barracks, where conditions were harsher than in regular camp barracks. There was less food, heavier labor, and stricter discipline. Their forced labor at that point consisted primarily of dismantling discarded batteries in work barracks, a task that involved exposure to toxic substances. All the people from the annex were held in Westerbork until the 3rd of September 1944. On that day, the 8 prisoners were placed on the last transport to leave Westerbork to Auschwitz. The transport consisted of approximately 1,019 to 1,030 people. They were transported in sealed cattle cars, and the journey lasted 3 days. The conditions during transport were extreme and consistent with other documented deportations. People were packed tightly together with no space to sit or lie down. There was little to no food. Water was extremely limited. A single bucket or barrel served as a toilet for dozens of people, and ventilation was minimal. 15-year-old Anne and the rest of the people from the annex arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau on the night of the 5th or early morning of the 6th of September 1944. Immediately after arrival, selection took place. SS doctors and officers determined who was deemed fit for forced labor and who would be murdered immediately. According to multiple survivor accounts and camp records, approximately 350 people from this transport were sent directly into the gas chambers. The remaining prisoners were registered for forced labor. All 8 occupants of the annex survived the initial selection. They were then separated. Men were sent to go to Auschwitz I, the main camp, while the women were sent to the women's camp in Birkenau. This was the last time the families ever saw each other. At Auschwitz I, nearly 1 million Jews from all over Europe and hundreds of thousands of Poles, Roma, Sinti, Soviet prisoners of war, and resistant fighters were imprisoned and murdered. Otto Frank was assigned to forced labor in Auschwitz I. He suffered from exhaustion and illness, but survived the autumn of 1944. He was hospitalized in January 1945 and therefore remained behind when Auschwitz was evacuated. He was liberated by the Soviet Red Army on the 27th of January 1945. Edith remained in Birkenau with Anne and Margot. She became increasingly weakened due to malnutrition and exhaustion. When Anne and Margot were transported out of Auschwitz in late October 1944, Edith was left behind, and she died there on the 6th of January 1945 from starvation and illness. Herman van Pels, who had also been staying with them in the annex, was murdered in Auschwitz on October 1944, likely during the selection for the gas chambers, but the exact date is unknown. Fritz Pfeffer was transferred from Auschwitz to another concentration camp, where he died of illness and exhaustion on the 20th of December 1944. As the Red Army advanced, Auschwitz began evacuating prisoners westward. In late October 1944, Anne and Margot Frank were placed on a transport of women from Birkenau to Bergen-Belsen. Auguste van Pels was also deported from Auschwitz, though the exact route and fate remain unclear, but she likely died in transport. After a 3-day transport in overcrowded cattle wagons, Anne and Margot Frank arrived at Bergen-Belsen in severely weakened condition. For the sisters, this marks the first time that they were ever separated from their mother, who remained behind in Auschwitz. Bergen-Belsen was not an extermination camp, but by late 1944 it had effectively become one. Conditions were catastrophic. Severe overcrowding, almost no food, no sanitation, and with constant exposure to cold and rain, there were widespread outbreaks of typhus, dysentery, and tuberculosis. After exiting the train, the girls were forced to walk several miles to the camp. Each woman received a blanket and a mess tin and was left waiting for hours. Survivors recall seeing Anne and Margot again at this point, standing together, wrapped in their blankets. Instead of barracks, the new arrivals were initially housed in large tents on open ground. The tents were overcrowded, leaky, and had no beds. Hundreds of women slept packed together on dirty straw. On the 4th night, a violent storm caused several tents to collapse, resulting in injuries and deaths. Afterward, the women were temporarily moved into storage huts before being redistributed within the camp. Anne and Margot were eventually placed in the Kleine Vrouwenlager, where conditions remained devastating. Multiple survivors later testified that both girls were emaciated and ill. They contracted epidemic typhus, and no effective medical treatment was available. Margot was the first to die, likely in February 1945 due to extreme weakness, and Anne died a few days later, also from typhus and just physical exhaustion. No exact days were recorded. Both girls were 15 and 18 years old, respectively. They were buried in mass graves. All of this only a few short weeks before the camp would be liberated. Out of the 8 people that had gone into hiding, only Otto Frank survived. After liberation, Otto returned to the Netherlands. During his journey, he learned that his wife Edith had died, and later in Amsterdam, he was informed that Anne and Margot had also died. 2 of the helpers, who had not been arrested and stayed behind in the office of the main house, Miep Gies and Beb Voskuil, shortly after the arrest had entered the secret annex and found Anne's diaries. So some time after Otto came back, Miep Gies gave him Anne's diaries and loose papers, which she and Beb had saved after the arrest. Until then, Otto had never read them. While reading Anne's writings, Otto discovered that she had not only kept a diary for herself, but had also begun rewriting it with the intention of publishing it after the war. She hoped to turn her diary into a book called Het Achterhuis, the Secret Annex. Otto initially found it painful to read, but was also moved by the literary quality of her work and by Anne's explicit wish to become a writer. So Otto decided to fulfill her ambition. He selected passages from both the original diary and the rewritten version, making careful edits to remove repetitions and some deeply private material. And then, in 1947, Het Achterhuis was first published in the Netherlands. The book initially reached a modest audience, but its impact grew steadily. Translations followed in the early 1950s, and the diary gained international recognition for its honest, human portrayal of life in hiding under Nazi persecution. Over time, Anne Frank's diary became one of the most widely read books in the world, and a central testimony of the Holocaust, translated into dozens of languages and read by millions. But with her story reaching millions, it also raised an unsettling question that went beyond individual suffering. How could a society reach a point where such persecution was carried out by ordinary people? In the years after the war, that question began to shape not only historical research, but psychological research as well. Psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted the obedience experiments in the early 1960s, partly in response to the Holocaust and the question many people were asking afterward. How could ordinary people participate in such extreme violence? In the experiment, participants were told that they were taking part in a study on learning and memory. They were instructed to administer electric shocks to another participant every time that person gave a wrong answer. The shocks increased in intensity with each mistake, eventually reaching levels labeled as danger, severe shock, and XXX. Of course, there was no other participant. The administrator only thought there were. But the key detail is that the person giving the shocks believed it was real. They could hear the learner protest, scream in pain, and eventually fall silent. At several points, participants hesitated, expressed distress, or said that they wanted to stop. But when the researcher, wearing a lab coat and speaking calmly, told them to continue, many did. About 2/3 of the participants continued administering shocks all the way to the highest level, even when they believed that they might seriously injure or even kill the other person. Not because they were cruel, but because responsibility felt transferred to the authority figure giving the orders. Milgram concluded that under certain conditions, ordinary people are capable of committing harmful acts when those acts are framed as necessary, legitimate, or part of a larger system, especially when responsibility feels diffuse or external. This doesn't excuse what happened during the Holocaust, but it does help explain how people who did not see themselves as evil could still become part of something deeply destructive. And it's also why it matters today. Under my own videos, I sometimes see comments that blame entire religions or groups of people for a crime committed. And those reactions are understandable when emotions run high. But this story shows exactly how dangerous that kind of thinking can be. When we stop looking at individuals and start assigning guilt to whole groups, we create the same mental shortcuts that allowed something as horrible as the Holocaust to happen. Anne Frank never got a chance to grow up. She never saw her words being published, never knew how far they would travel or how many people they would reach. Her story reminds us how easily fear and anger can be redirected away from individuals and onto entire groups of people, and how dangerous that shift can be. If there is one lesson here, it's this. We have to keep questioning systems, power, and actions without losing sight of individual responsibility. Because once stereotypes replace nuance, the world becomes easier to divide and much harder to protect. And that's it for today. Thank you all so much for listening. If you appreciated this episode, feel free to give it a like or leave a comment, or share it with somebody who you think might find this interesting as well. If you want to support my channel even more, there is a Patreon page in the description. Thank you all so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.